The bus station hummed faintly beneath flickering fluorescent lights, the kind that made everything feel colder than it already was. Midnight had long passed, leaving the metal benches icy and the tiled floor echoing with emptiness. The entire station felt abandoned by the world, holding only shadows and silence in its corners. At the far end, beneath the harshest lamp, a little boy sat curled on the floor like he was trying to disappear. He looked no more than 7, dressed in worn sneakers and a thin jacket that barely kept out the cold. A faded blue backpack was clutched tightly to his chest, held with trembling fingers as though it was the only anchor he had left. Beside him lay a woman slumped against a bench, her head resting at an awkward angle that suggested exhaustion rather than sleep. Long hair hid half her face, and her breathing came in shallow, uneven drags as if each one cost her strength. Her open hand lay plump on the floor, limp and resigned in a way that felt painfully wrong. The boy's eyes kept jumping between her face and the empty station, scanning the shadows like he expected danger to appear at any second. Fear lived in his gaze, old and heavy, far too much for someone so small to carry alone. His grip tightened on the backpack each time a distant sound echoed through the hollow space. A soft creak broke the silence, making the boy stiffen instantly as footsteps echoed across the floor. A sweeping flashlight beam cut through the dimness before rising toward the rows of chairs in a slow, cautious arc. Officer Hale stepped into view, flashlight steady, expecting the station to be empty at such an hour. He stopped when the light fell on the boy and the unconscious woman, lowering the beam so it wouldn't blind him. "Hey there, are you okay?" he asked gently, taking slow steps so he wouldn't startle the frightened child. The boy didn't reply, only tightening his hold on the backpack like a shield against the world. Hale crouched a little, keeping his voice soft as he tried again. "What's your name?" he asked, watching the boy's downcast eyes and shaking hands. After a long pause, the boy finally whispered, "Eli," his voice thin and cracked like he hadn't spoken in hours. Hale nodded calmly, trying to build trust where fear had rooted deeply. "Is she your mom?" the officer asked, glancing toward the woman slumped beside him. Eli hesitated, staring at her with a mixture of longing and dread before slowly shaking his head. "No," he whispered, the words small but heavy, carrying a weight Hale instantly recognized as something complicated. Hale's gaze landed on the boy's backpack, noticing a zipper slightly open with something white tucked inside. A hospital wristband peeked through, half hidden but unmistakable under the dim station lights. "Eli, what's that in your bag?" Hale asked gently, pointing toward the opening without moving closer. The boy instantly hugged the backpack tighter, as though he feared someone might rip it away. "She told me not to show anyone," he whispered, his voice trembling with a fear that felt alarmingly real. Hale's curiosity sharpened, but he kept his tone calm as he asked, "Who told you? The woman?" Eli nodded faintly, but didn't lift his eyes, his fingers gripping the strap so hard his knuckles turned white. Hale leaned back slightly to give him space, sensing something dangerous behind the boy's fear. "Why did she say that?" he asked, softly, trying to bridge the fragile trust forming between them. Eli's gaze flicked toward the station doors, scanning the dark windows like something might be waiting outside. "She said, someone was coming," he whispered, barely audible under the cold hum of the lights. "And if they found us, they'd take her away," he added, making Hale's stomach twist sharply. The officer looked at the pale woman again, noticing how her breathing trembled like a failing engine. She wasn't just tired, she was drained, fragile, and pushed far beyond her limits. Something was terribly wrong, and the fear in the boy's voice made the situation far more alarming than a runaway case. "Eli, why did she leave the hospital with you?" Hale asked, watching the boy's expression crumble under the weight of the question. Tears gathered in Eli's eyes, and his voice broke as he whispered. "She said she had no time. She said she had to protect me." The words hung heavy in the cold air. Before Hale could respond, Eli suddenly grabbed his sleeve with a trembling hand, eyes wide with desperate pleading. "Please," he whispered, voice fragile as glass. "Don't wake her." The fear in his tone wasn't simple panic, was terror-shaped by something much darker. Hale froze, caught between instinct and intuition as the boy's plea echoed through the empty station. Something about the situation felt deeply wrong, like they were all standing on the edge of a story much bigger and more dangerous than he'd expected. And somewhere out there, whoever Grace feared might already be on their way. Officer Hale stayed crouched before the boy, watching the tremor in Eli's small hands and the way his body curled protectively around the backpack. Whatever lay inside, it was more than important. It was something he feared losing more than anything else. Hale softened his voice as he said, "Eli, I'm not going to take her away. I just want to make sure she's okay." Eli shook his head quickly, breath catching in sharp little gasps as though the words themselves terrified him. "If she wakes up, she'll run again," he whispered, eyes darting nervously toward the doors. "She told me that." Hale felt the weight of the boy's fear and asked gently, "Run from who?" Though the answer hung unspoken between them. The boy's eyes remained fixed on the entrance, scanning the windows like he expected someone to break through at any moment. The depth of that fear made Hale's stomach tighten. A cause. Because this wasn't the fear of a child misbehaving. It was fear shaped by survival. He looked at the unconscious woman again, noticing how her breathing came in weak, uneven waves. Her exhaustion wasn't normal. And Hale realized immediately that she wasn't merely sleeping. She was crashing from something far more severe. Had she eaten? Had she walked too far? Or had something happened at the hospital that pushed her beyond breaking? The empty station offered no clues, only flickering lights and silence. Hale reached toward her neck to check her pulse, but Eli's hand shot out again, gripping his arm with startling strength. "Don't," the boy whispered sharply, eyes wide with panic. "Please, don't touch her." Hale paused mid-motion, lowering his hands slowly as he tried to ease the child's fear without losing his trust. "I have to make sure she's okay," Hale said softly, keeping his tone warm and steady. "I won't hurt her." Eli's breaths grew quicker, his fists pressing into his knees as he tried to hold himself together. After a moment, he whispered, "She said no one could touch her, not even the doctors," a confession that sent a chill across Hale's spine. The officer knew instantly that Grace hadn't left the hospital for rest or recovery. She had fled from something or someone she no longer trusted. He lowered his hand completely and kept his movements slow. "All right," he said gently. "I won't touch her yet, but can you tell me her name?" Eli hesitated, then whispered, "Grace." Hale repeated the name softly, looking at the fragile woman as though hearing her identity breathed life into the mystery. Grace looked drained beyond measure, her body twitching subtly as though fighting a losing battle with consciousness. She seemed like someone who had carried a burden far too heavy for far too long, and now she was collapsing under it. "Is she sick?" Hale asked cautiously, watching the boy for clues. Eli swallowed and answered. "She said the hospital couldn't help her. She said she had to leave." Hale absorbed that with concern, sensing a story full of gaps and pain. "And why did she bring you?" he asked gently, wanting to understand their bond. Eli hugged the backpack tighter, the movement small but filled with fear. "Because she said I shouldn't be alone," he whispered, voice cracking on the last word. Hale blinked in confusion, trying to piece together why a stranger would risk everything for a child she didn't know. "Alone? Why would you be alone?" he asked softly. The boy dropped his gaze to the floor, and his next words sliced through the air like something fragile breaking. "Akashi said, nobody else would come for me." Hale's breath caught painfully, realizing the depth of isolation this child had endured. Eli's small frame trembled with the truth he had carried far too long. "Eli," Hale murmured, voice soft with compassion, "where's your family?" The boy shook his head silently, without lifting his eyes, and Hale felt the silence fall heavy between them. It was the kind of silence that held grief, abandonment, and things a child should never have to explain. Behind them, Grace stirred weakly, drawing Hale's attention. Her soft groan pulled Eli instantly to her side, his small hands shaking her arm gently. "Grace, Grace, please wake up," he whispered, panic returning to his voice. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't fully wake, her breaths uneven and shallow as though trapped in a half-conscious struggle. Hale observed her in growing worry. "She's not waking because she needs help," Holly said gently, inching closer with caution. "She needs medical attention." Eli shook his head violently, fear rising like a wave inside him. "No, no hospital," he cried softly. "She said they'll find us there." Hale leaned in slightly, his voice steady. "Who will?" Eli's breath trembled as he clutched his backpack with white knuckles. "She said they were coming to take me away," he whispered in a breaking voice, "and she didn't want that to happen." Hale felt a chill crawl across him, sensing that something was deeply wrong. "Who is trying to take you?" he asked softly, trying to understand the threat. The boy hesitated, his small body trembling as though torn between fear and truth. Finally, he whispered, "They said I don't belong to her." Hale felt his heartbeat skip as the pieces began forming a darker picture. Eli looked at him with eyes wet and frightened. "They said, Grace stole me." The words fell like ice in the cold air. Hale froze, shock ricocheting through him as the possibility sank into his thoughts. A runaway woman, a terrified child, and a hospital wristband pointing toward some place they fled. Grace wasn't simply protecting a boy, she might have taken him in desperation, or perhaps something else entirely was happening. The truth felt more complicated than either option. Hale's gaze landed on the backpack again, noticing the hospital documents inside, shifting slightly. "Eli, can I see what's in your bag?" he asked gently. But the boy shook his head so fiercely that tears spilled down his cheeks. "She told me not to show anyone," Eli cried, panic filling his voice. "She said it's dangerous." "What's dangerous about it?" Ole asked, keeping his tone steady to avoid triggering more fear. Eli looked at Grace with heartbreaking loyalty, tears sliding down his face. "It's the papers," he whispered shakily. "The ones she took from the hospital." Hale's pulse quickened as he pieced together a fleeing woman and stolen documents tied to a child. "Eli, what kind of papers?" Ole asked, leaning closer with care. The boy hesitated, gripping the bag so tightly the fabric creased under his fingers. Finally, he whispered, "They're about me." Hale inhaled sharply, realizing that this was no ordinary case. This was something layered with secrets and shadows. Eli wiped his tears on his sleeve, his voice cracking as he continued. "Grace said the papers say whose I am. And she said if the wrong people get them, I'll never be free." Hale felt a cold dread tighten in his chest, knowing now that whatever those documents contained was powerful enough for someone to chase them relentlessly. Grace suddenly groaned louder, her body twitching violently as though fighting to wake. Eli immediately dropped to his knees beside her, gently shaking her arm. "Grace," he cried urgently. "Grace, please. Wake up." Hale watched the fear in the boy's movements with growing worry as her breathing worsened. Eli's voice broke as he begged her to wake up, the desperation clear in every repeated whisper. Hale saw the color draining from Grace's face, realizing she couldn't stay like this much longer. He reached for his radio, but Eli jumped up in panic, grabbing Hale's sleeve. "No," he cried. "Please don't call anyone. Please." Hale paused, seeing the terror carved into the boy's expression. "Grace said, if someone finds us, they'll take me first." Eli cried, trembling so hard his voice barely held together. Hale lowered the radio slowly, torn between the child's fear and the medical urgency before him. "Eli," Hale said softly, I know you're scared, but she needs help. We can't just stay here." Eli wiped his tears, voice barely a whisper as he said, "They'll take me." Hale crouched to his level, speaking gently. "Who is coming for you?" The boy's voice trembled as he whispered, "The people from the hospital." For a long moment, Officer Hale felt his heartbeat stall as he stared at the trembling boy. The words, "the people from the hospital," carried a weight that chilled him in a way few things could. Eli's eyes held no confusion, only the clarity of someone who had lived inside fear long enough to understand it deeply. Hale lowered his radio, recognizing that the situation was far darker than a simple runaway case. "Eli, what did the people from the hospital want with you?" he asked gently. The boy hugged the backpack closer, shaking harder as he whispered, "They said I wasn't supposed to leave. They said I had to stay there, forever." Those words made Hal feel something twist sharply inside him, an instinctive warning that something was terribly wrong. "Why would they say that?" he asked, though the boy only shook his head helplessly. Eli's voice trembled as he said, "I don't know, but Grace. She told me the truth." Hale leaned forward, sensing the importance of the next words and trying not to frighten him further. "What truth?" he asked quietly, watching Eli's small fingers curl around the straps. The boy swallowed hard, whispering that the hospital wasn't trying to help me. They were keeping me. The officer froze, the cold tile beneath him grounding the weight of those words. He had heard of bad institutions and broken systems, but something about this felt different, calculated, and intentional. "Keeping you how?" Hale asked, heart pounding as he tried to understand the danger Grace had risked everything to escape. "They didn't let me go outside," Eli whispered, his voice barely staying steady as he remembered. "They didn't let me play. They didn't let me talk to other kids. They said I was special. They said I had to stay in the observation room." Hale stiffened at the phrasing, knowing that term didn't belong in normal pediatric care. His pulse tightened as he asked gently, "Did they hurt you?" Eli shook his head slowly, but that didn't ease Hale's concern. "No, but they watched me, all the time. Day and night," the boy continued. "I could hear them outside the door, whispering, writing things down. They never let me out unless they needed to check something." This didn't sound like a hospital wing. It sounded like a research unit with procedures far outside ethical boundaries. Hale felt his stomach knot as he asked, "And Grace? Was she a nurse?" Eli shook his head quickly. "No, she cleaned the halls. She brought food. She was nice to me," he said, his voice softening with memory. "She told me I didn't belong there," Eli continued, wiping tears from his cheeks. "She said they weren't supposed to keep kids. She said I was just stuck there, like furniture." Hale clenched his jaw, feeling anger simmer beneath his calm exterior. Grace had seen something wrong, and she had acted when no one else did. "And she took you out?" Hale asked, needing to confirm it from the boy himself. Eli nodded slowly, whispering, "She said we had to leave before they came for me again." That single word, "again," made Hale's breath hitch. It suggested repeated attempts, repeated procedures, and repeated danger. "Eli, what were they planning?" Hale asked softly, fearing the answer more than he wanted to admit. The boy shook his head hard. "I don't know. Grace wouldn't tell me. She just kept saying we had to go before the doctors came back. She said the papers in my bag were the truth," he whispered, trembling. Hale's eyes flicked toward the bag, the silent, heavy object that seemed to hold the answers Grace died trying to protect. "Can I see them?" Hale asked quietly, hoping the boy might trust him enough now. But Eli instantly hugged the bag tighter, tears filling his eyes again. "She said, never show anyone," he cried. "Eli, I'm trying to help," Hale whispered gently, hoping to ease the panic rising in the boy's voice. But Eli shook his head violently, recalling memories that had shaped his fear. "They said that too," he whispered. "Everyone said they were helping me. but they weren't. They just wanted to take me back. Hale felt a cold tension coil through him as the realization settled. This child had been surrounded by people claiming to help, yet none had protected him. Before Hale could respond, Grace groaned again, her body jerking weakly as she struggled to wake. Eli rushed to her instantly, panic spilling from him like a flood. "Grace, Grace, please wake up," Eli begged, shaking her arm with trembling hands that betrayed his terror. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't stir beyond a faint twitch, her breathing weak and uneven. Hale stepped closer, face tightening with worry as he murmured, "She needs medical help, Eli. She won't survive like this." But the boy shook his head fiercely, tears spilling despite his attempts to hold them back. "No hospital," he cried desperately. "They'll find us. Grace said they'll take me first." Hale paused, feeling the weight of the boy's terror. He knew the woman's condition was deteriorating rapidly, yet Eli's fear wasn't something he could dismiss. "Eli," Hale said softly, "I know you're scared, but she needs help. Real help." The boy wiped his eyes with trembling fingers, gripping the backpack like it was the only safety he had. "They'll take me," he whispered again, his voice small and shattered. Hale leaned closer, his tone soft but firm, as he asked, "Who exactly is coming for you?" Eli swallowed hard, unable to hold back the truth any longer as fear broke through his last defenses. "The people from the hospital," he whispered, trembling from head to toe. Hale felt the words hit him like a cold wave, realizing the danger had already reached far beyond the station. And somewhere out there, someone was already coming. The metal handle twitched sharply, rattling against the door like a warning that something outside was ready to enter. Hale stepped forward instinctively, placing his body between the boy and the looming shadow beyond the glass. Eli pressed himself closer to Grace, gripping her limp hand as the fluorescent lights flickered above them. When the door finally swung open, a tall man stepped inside with polished movements that didn't match a late-night traveler. His charcoal coat, sleek scarf, and calm expression carried an unsettling precision. Another figure stood behind him, shorter, wearing scrubs beneath a jacket, both freezing when they saw Hale's uniform. The taller man offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes, giving the impression of someone trained to mimic friendliness. "Officer," he said smoothly, stepping forward with deliberate calm. Hale didn't lower his stance as he responded, "Station's closed. You need something." His tone carried authority rather than invitation. "We're looking for someone," the man said, adjusting his coat as if preparing for negotiation. The second man stepped forward nervously, blurting, "A patient." She left the hospital without clearance. Hale felt tension coil inside him as he recognized their anxiety. Was not for Grace's well-being, but for something she carried. "What hospital?" Hay asked, watching their eyes instead of their badges. The tall man answered without hesitation, "St. Rainer's Research Institute." The word institute struck Hale like a quiet alarm, placing the pieces of Eli's story into a darker frame. "We're part of the retrieval team," the man added calmly. Hale studied the badge but didn't rely on it, sensing the polished lie beneath the surface. "Why would she come here?" he asked, forcing them to explain themselves. "She's confused," the second man insisted, his voice shaking as he pointed toward the empty station. "The boy with her is in danger. She isn't supposed to care for him." Eli let out a small cry, one that broke through the false politeness instantly. Hale moved protectively, covering him with a calm but firm stance. "Why does the hospital care where he is?" Hale asked, watching the men stiffen. The second man smiled nervously. "He's under our observation," he said weakly. "Observation for what?" Hay pressed, refusing to give them room to manipulate the truth. The tall man interrupted sharply. "Officer, this is a medical matter. Please step aside." Hale didn't move, noting how their concern sharpened only when they mentioned the boy. It wasn't care, it was possession. Hale held the man's gaze and asked coldly, "Show me your real ID, not your badge." The tall man blinked with a hesitation too quick to hide, revealing the first crack in their story. "I'm not required," he began, but Hale cut him off sharply. "Yes, you are." The tension surged through the air immediately. The second man reached into his jacket suddenly, making Hale's instincts ignite like a warning flare. Hale's hand went straight to his holster as he barked, hands visible. Now, the man froze, stammering. Paperwork. Just paperwork. But Hale saw the panic in his eyes, the kind that came from being caught in a lie. The tall man's polite mask slipped as he hissed, "Officer, you're making a mistake." Hale stepped forward, his voice becoming steel. "I'm preventing one." The man's jaw tightened, anger darkening his eyes as he whispered, "She took something that belongs to us." Eli gasped, clutching Hale's leg fearfully. "A child is not property," Hale said, voice low with fury. The man's nostrils flared as he answered, "You don't understand what's at stake." Hale glared at him steadily. "Then explain it." "Right now," the second man whispered fearfully. "He wasn't supposed to leave. He's part of the program." Hale felt Eli's grip tighten until his leg trembled under the child's fear. "The program?" he asked slowly, but the men refused to answer. The overhead lights flickered again, humming like the station itself sensed the danger. Hale shifted just enough to shield both Eli and Grace entirely behind him. "You're not taking anyone tonight," Hale said with unwavering calm. The tall man's eyes hardened into something sharp and cold, stepping forward like a predator closing in. Hale dropped his hand fully onto his weapon in warning, but the man only sneered. "No officer wants to shoot a doctor," he said softly. Hale didn't blink as he replied, "Good thing you're not acting like one." The room thickened with a tension that felt ready to snap at any moment. Eli's breathing turned quick and panicked behind Hale, each breath trembling against the officer's leg. Grace let out a weak cough, reminding them all how fragile she was. The men reacted to her cough with urgency, but not the kind that sought to save her. It was the urgency of people afraid to lose something irreplaceable. "Officer, move," the tall man ordered with growing agitation. Hale shook his head slowly. "Over my dead body," he said. Something dark flickered in the man's eyes as he whispered, "As you wish." Then he lunged forward with startling speed, and the fight Hale had feared finally exploded into reality. The tall man lunged with the speed of someone trained to overpower, his coat sweeping sharply behind him as he reached for Hale. The officer reacted instantly, pulling Eli behind him while turning his body to block the attack. Eli stumbled backward with Grace's hands still clutched tightly, his terrified gasp echoing through the station. The man grabbed for Hale's holster, forcing the officer into a struggle that slammed both of them into metal chairs. Hale drove his shoulder into the attacker, pushing him off balance just long enough to create distance. "Stay behind me," Hale shouted, his voice firm as Eli crouched near Grace with trembling hands. "You should have stayed out of this," the tall man snarled, rising with a fury that twisted through his calm mask. Hale positioned himself like a shield, refusing to let the man near the child or the woman. "Back off," Hale warned, watching every shift of the man's posture as tension crackled between them. A bitter laugh escaped the man as he shook out his wrist like someone confident in victory. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he hissed. "Give us the woman and the boy." Hale's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, refusing to let a single command pass unchallenged. "He's a child, not something you reclaim," Hale snapped, his voice low with anger. The tall man smirked, as though amused by the officer's defiance. "That woman stole classified material, and that boy," he began, but quickly stopped the moment he realized he had revealed too much. Eli cried softly behind Hale, shaking harder. Hale didn't let the slip go unnoticed as he replied, "She didn't steal anything. She saved him." The man's expression darkened, and he slid his hand behind his coat with unsettling precision. Hale's instincts flared instantly. "Don't even think about it," he warned, lifting his hand toward his holster without drawing. The man ignored him and drew a small syringe with a swift, practiced motion. Hale's breath froze as Eli screamed in panic behind him. The man didn't aim for Hale, but went straight for Grace with a cold, unwavering purpose. Hale lunged, slamming the man's wrist against the bench so the syringe flew across the floor. "You're not sedating her," Hale barked, gripping the man's arm as the two struggled. The attacker twisted with surprising strength and shouted, "She's a liability. She has to be contained." Hale shoved him back, eyes blazing with fury. "That's not medication. That's a knockout dose." The second man peeked from behind a bench, his fear evident as he shouted, "Just get the kid. Forget her, get the kid." Eli cried out and hid his face in Grace's shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. The tall man lunged again, aiming past Hale, but the officer struck him in the chest with enough force to send him stumbling. "Don't move," Hale shouted, voice honed with years of training. But the tall man didn't freeze. Instead, he pulled out a small radio and pressed a button with a cold confidence. "Target located," he said calmly. "Bus station. Bring the recovery team." Hale felt dread settle heavily in his chest. "Recovery team," Cal repeated, realizing the threat was far from over. The tall man stepped closer with a triumphant smirk. "You're outnumbered already," he taunted. "Stand down." Hale planted himself firmly in front of Eli and Grace, refusing to give an inch. "Not happening," he said, his voice hardening. The tension shattered when a bus driver rushed in, hearing the commotion and stopping abruptly at the sight. Hale pointed at her quickly. "Call 911. Now." She ducked behind a pillar with her phone, dialing immediately. The tall man cursed under his breath, knowing the situation had turned against him. "This just got messy," he snarled, stepping back as the officer approached with steady resolve. Hale pushed him down, pinning his wrist as the man twisted violently beneath him. The second man panicked and sprinted for the exit, fleeing into the night like someone who realized the consequences were greater than he understood. Hale didn't chase him, knowing he couldn't abandon Eli or Grace in their vulnerable state. The tall man broke free for a second, shoving Hale off balance before scrambling to his feet. Hale lunged again, but the man escaped through the exit and disappeared into the dark with frightening speed. Backup officers arrived moments later, as the station erupted into blue and red flashes. Hale moved back to Eli quickly, his breath heavy with adrenaline. "Eli, are you hurt?" he asked softly. The boy shook his head, sobbing as he clung to Grace. "He tried to take me. He tried to take her." "She's going to get help," Hale assured him gently, though worry crept over his expression as he checked Grace's pulse. Her breaths were shallow, her body shaking with growing weakness. The bus driver returned, saying, "Ambulance is on the way," her voice trembling with fear and shock. Eli grabbed Hale's sleeve in terror, crying, "No hospital. They'll take me. Please, don't let them take me." Hale placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, his heart tightening at the child's desperation. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. "Not with them. Not ever again." Grace stirred weakly, her lips barely parting as she tried to speak. Eli leaned closer, with tears streaming, whispering, "Grace. Grace, I'm here." Her voice came out faint and broken as she whispered, "Eli, run," before her breath faltered. Eli shook her arm desperately, crying, "No, no, no, stay awake." Her eyes fluttered open briefly, filled with pain and exhaustion as she forced out another breath. "The program won't let him go," she whispered before her voice faded completely. Hale reached for her wrist, hoping for a pulse, but his heart sank when he felt nothing beneath his fingers. Eli's scream tore through the station, raw and heartbreaking as he shook Grace's arm in denial. "Grace, wake up. Please don't leave me," Kay sobbed, collapsing beside her with shuddering breaths. Hale pulled the boy into his arms as the child broke apart, holding him tightly against his chest as Eli wept uncontrollably. Outside, sirens echoed closer as the night lit up with emergency vehicles surrounding the station. Hale knew something grim with absolute certainty. Grace was gone, taken by exhaustion and fear, long before help could reach her. And whoever had chased them here would not stop with her death. Whoever these men worked for wanted the boy, and they would return. Eli clung to Grace's still body, shaking her arm as though sheer will could bring her back. His cries echoed painfully across the empty station, each one cracking like a small piece of him breaking. Grief sat heavy in the air, filling the hollow room with a sound no child should ever make. Hale knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the boy's trembling shoulder while searching for words that didn't exist. He watched Eli's small frame curl into Grace, his sobs pulling from a place too deep for someone his age. The bus driver stood nearby, her hand over her mouth as she tried to hold back tears. Hale forced himself to stand and scan the darkened lot outside. Knowing the danger had not ended with Grace's final breath. The tall man and his partner were gone, but their threat clung to the air like a lingering shadow. Backup officers stormed the scene as sirens flashed, securing entrances and checking the surrounding area. One officer ran in, breathless, reporting that the van tied to the attackers had been abandoned nearby. Hale's jaw tightened at the news, understanding that it meant the men were regrouping instead of retreating. He turned back to the boy, seeing Eli still curled beside Grace as though afraid to let her out of his sight. "Eli, we have to go," Hale said softly, kneeling beside him with patience. The boy shook his head fiercely, whispering, "I can't leave her." His voice cracked with grief, his hands gripping Grace's sleeve in fragile defiance. Hale's heart tightened as he tried again, keeping his tone warm and steady. "She won't be alone," Hale whispered. "They'll take care of her, I promise. But right now, you're in danger." Eli wiped his face with trembling fingers, unable to pull away from the lifeless body beside him. "She said they'll find me if I'm alone," he whispered, voice hollow and broken. "You're not alone," Hale said, placing a firm hand under his arm to help him stand. For a long moment, Eli looked up at him with a fragile mix of fear and hope, as though deciding whether he could trust the world again. Finally, he nodded weakly, letting Hale guide him gently to his feet. The weight of the backpack pulled at Eli's shoulder as Hale lifted it, slipping one strap over the boy's arm. Eli flinched instantly, clutching the bag to his chest with fresh fear. "Don't take it," he whispered, voice shaking. Hale shook his head softly. "It stays with you. I'm only helping you carry it." Before they could move further, the ambulance arrived with lights flashing against the station walls. 2 paramedics rushed forward, but stopped when Hale raised his hand sharply. "Wait outside," he ordered firmly. We have hostile individuals possibly returning. It isn't safe for you inside." The paramedics exchanged worried glances before stepping back cautiously toward the ambulance. Hale turned his attention to Eli, placing a reassuring hand on his small shoulder. "We're going to my car. You'll be safe there," he whispered. Eli nodded again, though fear still trembled through him. As they walked toward the exit, the glass doors slid open and a sharp slam echoed from the parking lot. Hale pushed Eli behind a concrete pillar instantly, instinct pulling him into a defensive stance. He peeked around the edge and saw a dark van parked in the shadows like a predator waiting patiently. The tall man stepped out with a cold, deliberate calm, his fury visible even across the distance. 2 more figures shifted inside the van, silhouettes hinting at numbers Hale couldn't ignore. "Eli," Hale whispered, "stay behind me and don't move." The boy grabbed his pant leg, trembling violently. The man stepped forward until he stood under the flickering overhead light, his eyes locked on the child he had come to reclaim. "You can't protect him forever," he called, his voice dripping with threat. Hale stepped forward, guarding the boy with unwavering resolve. He's under police protection now. Leave." The man laughed softly, shaking his head as though mocking the very idea of safety. "You think a badge matters to us?" he replied, his expression darkening. Hale didn't blink as he responded, "Try me." The van doors creaked, revealing the silhouettes of 2 more men preparing to move. Hale called out sharply to the officers in the lot, north side. Now, their footsteps pounded across the pavement as flashlights swung through the darkness. The tall man's smirk faded the moment he heard backup closing in. His jaw clenched, and he pointed at Eli with cold certainty. "You aren't free," he said, his voice low and venomous. The words sliced through the night like a blade, making Eli flinch behind Hal with a quiet sob. Without another warning, the men scrambled back into the van just as police lights burst across the parking lot. Tires screeched as the van sped away into the dark. Eli collapsed against Hale, crying so hard his small chest heaved with every breath. Hale knelt and wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him as tightly as he dared without causing fear. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I won't let them touch you." But deep inside, Hale felt the truth settle like a stone in his chest. The men weren't running away. They were regrouping. Eli wasn't just lost in a broken system. He was hunted by something far bigger than any hospital or institution. And whatever secrets lay inside his backpack were dangerous enough to kill for. Hale lifted the boy into his arms, carrying him with a held breath that masked the weight he now bore. "We're leaving," he whispered. "You're coming with me." Eli clung to him silently, holding on with a terrified strength that told Hale everything he needed to know. That boy had never been protected before. As Hale carried him toward the cruiser, he knew something had shifted permanently. Protecting Eli wasn't just a duty now, it was a promise made in the middle of darkness. And if the men came again, they wouldn't be facing a frightened child. They would be facing an officer determined to burn down any system that tried to take him. Hale drove through the quiet streets with one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting near Eli's shoulder to reassure him. The cruiser felt strangely warm compared to the cold chaos they had escaped, and the hum of the heater filled the silence. Eli curled into the seat, clutching Grace's backpack tightly as though it held the last piece of safety he had left. The precinct lights glowed ahead, bright against the night, promising a kind of security the boy had never known. Hale guided Eli through the side entrance, avoiding the reporters gathering at the front doors after hearing about an attempted abduction. Inside, Lieutenant Ford hurried toward them with urgent steps and a worried expression. "Hale, the team canvassed the area and found the van abandoned," she said quietly. Prints matched someone from St. Rainer's research division. Hale felt a grim confirmation settle in his chest, knowing now the men weren't just posing as staff. "This is bigger than we thought," Ford added when she glanced at Eli's fragile figure. Hale guided the boy into a calm interview room where a blanket and a bottle of water had been set out for him. Eli sat stiffly on the chair, eyes still swollen and tired, as Hale knelt in front of him. "Eli, do you remember anything else about what they wanted?" he asked gently, keeping his voice soft. "They said I was special," the boy whispered, his chin trembling as he stared at the table. "They said I was part of the next phase, but they never told me what it was." Hale felt his pulse tighten, recognizing the language of experiments rather than care. "Grace told me I wasn't supposed to be there," Eli added quietly. Hale opened the backpack and carefully unfolded the documents Grace had stolen, each page more disturbing than the last. The files described Eli as a subject rather than a child, with logs and reports signed only by staff. Every page referenced long-term observation, revealing a system designed to hold him indefinitely. "This isn't medicine," Hale said under his breath. "This is captivity." Eli looked up with frightened eyes, whispering, "What's going to happen to me now?" Hale placed the papers aside and gave him a warm, steady smile. "You're going somewhere safe," he said softly. somewhere no one can lock you away again. With you? Eli asked in a small, hopeful voice that nearly broke Hale's composure. The officer hesitated only a moment before nodding firmly. Yes, he said. With me. The boy inhaled shakily, then moved into Hale's arms with a silent flood of relief. Hale held him tightly, knowing the child finally felt protected. Lieutenant Ford called Hale into the hallway and informed him that Child Protective Services had been alerted. They can place him tonight, she said gently, but Hale shook his head without hesitation. He's not going to another institution, he replied. He stays somewhere he trusts. Right now, that's me. Ford studied his expression before nodding, understanding the weight behind his decision. You'll sign as temporary guardian until morning, she said. He's your responsibility now. Hal returned to the boy, finding him sitting quietly with the blanket pulled over his knees, waiting for him without looking up. Let's go home, Hale whispered, extending his hand. Eli stood with a timid nod and followed the officer through the quiet halls to the cruiser outside. The night air was cold, but the boy leaned against the seat with the first small sense of safety he had felt in years. For the first time, the darkness didn't scare him. As Hale started the engine, he caught a glimpse of Eli in the rearview mirror holding the backpack gently against his chest. That small, fragile look of trust settled something deep inside Hale, something that made him more determined than ever. Protecting this boy was no longer just duty, it was personal. Miles away in a dim office at St. Rainer's, the tall man slammed his bruised hand against a metal desk in furious frustration. They took the boy, he growled, pacing like an animal denied its prey. A voice in the shadows spoke calmly, then get him back. The man straightened with cold certainty. He rubbed the bruise Hale had left on his wrist, rage simmering beneath his skin as he whispered, "We will." But he didn't understand that the game had already changed. He wasn't chasing a helpless child anymore. He was chasing a boy protected by someone willing to burn down the whole system to keep him safe. And this time, they wouldn't be the hunters. They would be the hunted.